Hello, everyone. I'm Taylin Washington Harmon, and I'm the clinical trials editor here at blackdoctor.org. And welcome to our monthly clinical trials show where we discuss anything and everything clinical trials, clinical research, and how Black people can be a part of it. So I'm really excited to share a very special guest. Her name is Danielle Mitchell, and she is the founder and CEO of Black Women in Clinical Research, a really pivotal organization that's dedicated to embracing and empowering Black women who work in clinical research and just highlighting all the amazing work that they're doing that's ultimately going to make the healthcare landscape better for Black people and Black women in general. So, Danielle, so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Taylin, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you here too. So, I guess I want to ask you first, why should Black women be a part of clinical research?
So, before we dive into that question, I do want to do a short introduction if that is okay with you.
Yes, yes, tell
Okay.
me. Tell
Okay.
me more.
So, my name is Danielle Mitchell. I am the CEO and founder of Black Women in Clinical Research. The mission of Black Women in Clinical Research is to educate, empower, support, and help Black women thrive in the clinical research industry. Today, we have been able to help over 3,000 Black women receive jobs in the clinical research industry. We have over 20,000 followers of Black women in clinical research. And so we know that if we can increase the diversity in the clinical research workforce, then we can increase the diversity in the patient population.
100%. 100%. So, what made you start this organization? Like, tell us a little bit about the history.
Yes. So back in 2019, I attended an investigator meeting. In a room of hundreds of people, there were only two Black women, including myself. So it really made me question whether or not there was a lack of diversity in the room or if there was a lack of diversity in the industry. This all
Mhm.
started from a Facebook group. After I left the investigator meeting, I started this Facebook group, and I never imagined that it would turn into a company. I didn't even think that it was a good idea. I thought at the most maybe 100 people would join. Well, fast forward, our Facebook group has over 10,000 people that are in the Facebook group. So we have just been able to really help other Black women when it comes to receiving jobs in the clinical research industry.
That's great. That's great. So, how would you say that the number of women that are in your group, do you feel like it's somewhat reflective of the amount of Black women who have actually participated in clinical research?
Yes. So currently, there is a lack of diversity in the workforce. And we know that because there's a lack of diversity in the workforce, there's also a lack of diversity in the patient population. I know when I was looking at the numbers, there's only between 2 to 5% of Black women actually participate in clinical trials, even though we know that Black women are facing diseases and illnesses, a lot of times higher than any other race.
Mhm. Mhm. So what got you personally interested in wanting to work in clinical research?
So I'm gonna take you guys through a journey. I wanted to be a medical doctor. I went
Mhm.
to Clark Atlanta University. I had a
Mhm.
bachelor's degree in biology. And when I decided not to go to medical school, there weren't a lot of career options. At the time, some of the career options was working in a lab or becoming a teacher. So I worked in a lab for years. And at the time, I called it the dungeon because there were no windows. I was pipetting
Mhm.
all day, every day. And because I knew I wanted to make a greater impact, I really started to pray and search and ask, what can I do with this biology degree? And I
Mhm.
went to a pool party one day and I met one of my college classmates who told me she was in clinical research. She said she gets to work from home, she gets to travel. I immediately said to myself, well, how do I get involved in clinical research? And so I made it my mission from that day to learn more about clinical research. And with my grandmother having breast cancer, I really felt very
Mhm.
connected to, learning more about clinical research and what it takes exactly to be successful in this industry.
Definitely, definitely. And we know Black women are disproportionately affected by breast cancer. And there's so many clinical trials that I'm grateful that are coming out thanks to amazing researchers like you and the women like you. So I do want to dive in a little bit is like, what are some of the historical and current barriers that are keeping Black women from not only working in clinical research, but even participating in clinical research?
So historically, the Tuskegee syphilis study, where they really didn't give treatment to people who had syphilis. Also, the Henrietta Lacks, where they took her cells without her permission. So, a lot of these historical events have really stopped Black people participate in clinical trials. And also, when it comes to clinical trials, just we are not being asked to participate in clinical trials. And so, I looked at a study where 80% of the women said that they would participate in a clinical trial, but then the number was also high to where 80%, close to 80%, said that they had never been asked to participate in a clinical trial. So I think
Mhm.
a lot of times I would say the industry and like the healthcare industry thinks that Black women don't want to participate in clinical research, but that is so far from the truth.
And that's such a catch-22 because, okay, we're not being asked to participate, yet we don't know how certain drugs or certain treatments might affect us because we're not being asked. So it's like, okay, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, we need Black women who can participate so that we can learn more. And thus, when we have more Black women who are participating in research, we can have more Black women who also would want to work in clinical research. Would you agree on that?
Absolutely. This has been the best career option for me. It has fulfilled so many goals that I've had for myself. And just like I said, with my grandmother having breast cancer, and also I met a lady named Sheila Johnson who had breast cancer, and she did a interview with blackdoctor.org. And
Mhm.
so she was able to participate in clinical trials, and it helped prolong her life. 13 years she was on clinical trials, and she was able to live a happy life after being diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer. So I know that clinical trials can help people. It doesn't have to be a last option, it can be a healthcare option.
That's great. That's great. So, what are some of the key initiatives that Black women in clinical research, your organization, are doing not only to recruit more Black women to work in clinical research, but to get more Black women inspired to participate in research in general?
So I know for me, and I'll use a little story. I like using stories. I have a cousin who has seen a lot of my posts about clinical research. And because I have posted about clinical research, clinical trials, she was open to the idea of participating in clinical trials because of my involvement with clinical research. So for us with Black women in clinical research, we are equipping our members to be that trusted community partner to let people know about the importance of clinical research. A lot of times, just telling people what you do, because most people think of clinical research and they think that you work in a lab, but that's not true in a lot of cases. So, just being able to be that person in my family and my community. I really feel like if people can see people who look like them that are in these spaces, then it's the idea of participating in a clinical trial doesn't seem so scary. There isn't a fear when you have someone that you can talk to and you can ask questions about the clinical trial process. I think a lot of times, because we're not talking about clinical trials in safe spaces, then we don't know about clinical research. And I always tell people the first time you hear about clinical research should not be when you're going to the hospital, should not be when you're going to the clinic. So we have to figure out different ways to have these conversations in the church, in like I would say, any type of health fairs, talking about clinical trials in a safe way that makes people feel comfortable and makes people want to learn more about clinical research.
Definitely. What would you say are some different types of careers in clinical research that, people can explore?
So for me, I'll start from how I worked my way into clinical research. I went on clinicaltrials.gov. I found the I found the nearest clinical research site near me, and I asked them, could I do an internship? So I really worked my way from the ground up because that internship helped me to land a role as a clinical research coordinator in regulatory. So, as a clinical research coordinator, I was able to submit studies to the Institutional Review Board. I was able to communicate with the doctors and co investigators to tell them, hey, I need you to sign this document, or, hey, this is a new update with the study. So, there is a clinical research coordinator position, where a lot of times you're working at the site. There are clinical research associates where you are, monitoring the clinical trials. That is, I would say that is the most popular clinical research role, because you get to travel and you get to work from home. And so there's also positions like project management, data management. I tell people that there is a position for everyone when it comes to clinical research, because these are careers and positions that would be at any company. So HR, whatever you name it, you can think about it. Clinical research has a role for you. And I like to bring all of my family into clinical research as well, because it's been such a lucrative career for me. And I want more people to know about clinical research.
That's really beautiful, because so many people, at least a common misconception that I hear, is that there's no way to change the healthcare landscape unless you're a doctor or a nurse or a legislator. But there's a whole sector here that, that you Black women are just absolutely just running. And it's great. I love to hear about it. So, what are some common misconceptions that you think people have about like doing clinical research?
So, what I hear a lot of times is that people feel like they are a guinea pig, or, I hear that a lot when I go to different events. And so, to me, I think a lot of people don't realize that when it comes to clinical trials, you are being monitored more closely than you would if you were just going to a doctor visit. So to me, I feel like this is the best outcome for you when it comes to your health. You want to make sure that someone is monitoring you. If you have questions, you can feel free to ask these questions. And so I feel like with clinical trials, it's a more focused health approach when it comes to your health journey.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree. Um, so I would also say, like, how is when somebody like a Black person who goes to a clinical trial site, do you feel like they're a little bit more comfortable when they see a Black, coordinator or a Black person who's helping them, go through this process?
Yes, absolutely. I'll I'll tell you another story. So I met a lady who her mother was about to have breast surgery, and she felt really nervous about her mother having this breast surgery. And so she said she was sitting there waiting for the doctor to walk in, and she said, in comes like walk a doctor walks in, and it's actually a Black woman. So she said she immediately felt relieved to see that it was a Black woman that was going to be performing her surgery for her mother. And so, she asked the doctor, "Can I hug you?"
Mhm.
So just because it was a sense of relief, like, okay, I have someone who looks like me, who, is going to care for my mom and treat her as if she's a family member or even her mother. And so it's just a level of comfort that people have, especially in the Black community. When you see someone who looks like you, it is an unspoken language a lot of times, that communication, that understanding that you have when you see someone who looks like you. So I feel like it's very important for us to be involved. If we want to make a change when it comes to healthcare, we have to be involved. We have to be at the clinics. We have to be at the hospital. We have to be that face, and we have to be there for people to feel comfortable with participating in clinical trials.
Hmm. What are some places where you feel like would be a best place to discuss, like, the benefits of clinical trials or clinical research outside of the doctor's office? Because I think you briefly mentioned, the church, but what are some places to kind of bring this type of stuff up?
Yeah, so like you said, the church, I was just amazed during COVID with my pastor and how he introduced, I would say, talking about COVID-19 testing. He was talking about the vaccines here in Michigan at Triumph Church. So my pastor was really involved. And anytime, for example, in October, everyone in the choir wore their breast cancer awareness shirt. So I think it's really important in spaces where people feel comfortable. And it doesn't really matter, where the location is. It can be at, when you're getting your hair done. I had another situation when I was getting my hair done. I had on a Black Women in Clinical Research t-shirt. And the lady saw my t-shirt, and sometimes I forget I even have it on. She saw my t-shirt and asked me, what is clinical research? And so I started telling her, and she said, the only reason that I felt comfortable asking you about clinical research is because you were a Black woman. And I knew that if I asked you about this, that you would tell me more about clinical research. And she even shared with me that she had breast cancer. So a lot of times wearing a t-shirt, wearing a pin, something that prompts someone to have a conversation with you, that will really open up people and make people feel comfortable. If you're getting your nails done, when I tell you that I've talked about clinical research everywhere I go, the grocery store, talking to the cashiers about clinical research. Clinical research is a part of me, so I wear it wherever I go, and I want people to know about my passion, and I want to have those conversations with people about health, because I know that especially in the Black community, we don't always share what we are going through when it comes to our health. And especially in my family, we don't always share, breast cancer runs in our family. We don't talk about it. But I want to make sure that I am that trusted community partner in my family and in my community where people feel comfortable. And maybe I can tell someone, hey, I know a clinical trial that you can participate in.
No, that's so great. I kind of have a similar story during COVID-19 as well. I mean, I'm not a healthcare professional in the traditional sense, but I am a healthcare journalist. And a lot of my family members, came to me with so many questions about like, Taylin, like, can you tell me more about like what's in the vaccine? Like, can I trust it? And it feels like you almost fulfill a role because they don't really feel comfortable going to anyone else. But when you know that it's a trusted individual that you can go to, it's so much easier.
Yes, I agree.
So, what advice do you have for young women, young Black women who are interested in, participating in clinical research, like doing what you do, your job?
So, shameless plug, join Black Women in Clinical Research. We have a BWICR app. We have resources to help you if you're interested in clinical research. We have Wind Down Wednesdays as well, where it's a safe space for Black women to share more about clinical research, ask questions about, maybe it might be something when it comes to interviews, but just to have that information and those resources available for people who are interested. That's what we really want to do. We want to give you the tools and resources necessary in order to help you succeed in your clinical research career. I know for me, I felt alone when I started in the clinical research industry because I didn't see a lot of representation. So we are changing that by providing those resources, that safe space for you to be comfortable to share and just what you're experiencing with getting into the clinical research industry, whether it's a resume review or interview prep, just being able to help you navigate this clinical research journey, because it's not easy. I will let people know that it is a challenging industry, but with the right help and support, you really can excel in your career.
No, that's great. I think you might have touched on this very briefly, but how did you find your very first like member of your organization? Like, how did you find your very first couple of members?
So I, funny story, that before Black Women in Clinical Research became as big as it is now, I started reaching out to people and telling them, hey, I have this Facebook group called Black Women in Clinical Research. I have this organization. So I guess I was shooting my shot to other Black women to let them know about Black Women in Clinical Research. And so I was involved in some different type of, I would say, career Facebook groups. So I saw that some people were talking about clinical research, and I realized that we didn't have a space for Black women that were interested in clinical research. So I started sending cold messages. So the same way that I got into clinical research by sending cold messages to the clinical trial site is the same way that I helped build Black women in clinical research. I went into the inboxes of a lot of Black women that were interested or involved in clinical research and told them about this organization that I created.
Oh, that's solid. So, how did you bring the organization from being online to, meeting in person?
So as we grew, it just it just made sense to have meetups and to have networking events. We were able to have our first conference in 2022. And so it has really grown into, I would say, an amazing organization. And so that's why our second annual conference, we're having our third annual conference this year. And so I just knew from planning these events and the people that showed up, the amount of people that reached out to me and told me that, Danielle, I need help. I want to network with Black women that are near me. So by us creating chapters and saying, okay, we know that North Carolina is a research hub. Let's create a safe space for Black women in this area. Okay, we know that Atlanta has a lot of, clinical research professionals. So we made chapters based upon how many, like the majority of the members that are located in that area. So we just wanted to be able to have these safe spaces where we can show up, because many times when you are in the clinical research industry and you're on a team, sometimes you're the only person that looks like you on your team. So you kind of feel isolated in the clinical research industry at these companies. So having that safe space to be able to connect with Black women and to have these meetups has just really helped a lot of Black women in their clinical research career.
That's great. So has your organization ever been able to sponsor anyone, like whether it's through a scholarship or a mentorship or anything of that sort?
Absolutely. I sponsor people all the time. And it's not something where I make it publicly like, hey, I did this. But I just want our members, whether it is a free resume review or whether it is attending conferences. I have sent members to conferences before. I've helped members with their resume review, sending them that service for them. So many different situations I have helped and assisted, and Black Women in Clinical Research has as well. We have a mentorship program that is kicking off today. So a lot of members are able to have that connection with someone that's in the clinical research industry so they can bounce ideas off of, just to have that level of support. You don't have to walk in this journey alone. And so that's what we really want our members to know, that this is not a industry where you have to be by yourself, and that
Mhm.
whatever you are going through, that you have someone there that can be supportive and that can lend a helping hand.
That's great. That's great. So, how can BDO basically further the mission of Black women in clinical research? Like, we want to be able to just spread the word because it's just incredible work that you're doing, and not enough people know about it.
Well, I just think, we have taken these steps already with just telling more people about Black women in clinical research, being present at the Black Women in Clinical Research Conference. I know I've talked to some people where they said that BDO can be a media partner at the Black Women in Clinical Research Conference. I really feel like if we can bring more awareness to what we are doing, because clinical research is such a hidden career, a lot of people don't know that it exists. There are not clinical research programs at colleges and universities. So bringing this awareness, I should say, to a lot of other industries. It's great that we have, we're staying in clinical research, but we have to let people know outside of clinical research that this is an industry and that we are trying to bring more awareness to.
Yes, for sure, for sure. So, what are some of the future goals that you have for your group?
So my future goals is to double the amount of members that we have in Black Women in Clinical Research, is to double, I should say triple the amount of support that we have with the CROs and the pharmaceutical companies. We want to be a larger organization. So whatever we can do to grow as an organization, how we can help our members grow as well professionally, and just to continue to have those collaborations with organizations like BDO. And so figuring out ways where we can partner and collaborate on different events. And so I recently got invited to an event and I'm excited. This will be my first video in-person event. And so just, having that open communication and making each other aware of the different opportunities, I feel like is so important.
Oh, that's gonna be great. I can't wait to see how that event rolls out. But ultimately, when there's more Black women in clinical research, how do you think that will ultimately impact the healthcare landscape that we have today? I mean, there's so much going on. We just inaugurated a new president. So how do you feel like if there's more Black women in clinical research in general, how do you think healthcare will change?
So if we can make steps towards that, then we can make sure that the drugs are safe and effective for the Black community. If we know that majority of the drugs are being tested on white males, the Black community is at a disadvantage. And so making sure that there is representation and in clinical trials, and making sure that people who are interested in clinical research have the opportunity to talk to their community. So it's really a two-part, the clinical trial patient population and the clinical research workforce. I know a lot of times when I'm talking to people in the industry, we're thinking only about the patients, but we need to think about the people that will help recruit patients. So I always say that diverse professionals recruit diverse patients. And so we have to look at it that way in order to really make a shift and change when it comes to, healthcare.
I definitely like you're saying there when you said diverse, like basically a diverse workforce will help recruit diverse patients. So do you have any thoughts about the FDA's draft guidance that, is basically pushing, pharmaceutical companies to have more diversity when it comes to clinical trials? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. I really think when it comes to the FDA guidance, we have to give those smaller sites an opportunity to get involved in clinical trials. So currently, there are sites that are privately owned where they are serving the communities that there's a lack of diversity in. So if we really want to make sure that these clinical trials reflect the communities, we have to allow these small clinical trial sites to participate in clinical trials. I know a lot of times when it comes to the industry, we will go to the same company that we've used before to conduct these clinical trials. But we need to take a step back and look at these smaller sites and look at what population are we not serving? What population, where is there a gap? And so I think once we can realize where the gap is when it comes to the patients and the diversity of the patients, then we can really, make that difference when it comes to the FDA guidance so that we are following those guidelines.
For sure, for sure. Is there anything about clinical research that you feel like we haven't talked about enough on our show today?
I think we covered really a lot, how to get involved in clinical research, the clinical research professionals. I just think that it's important for us to, be like, once we find out about clinical research, to tell other people about it. I think it really has, a lot of times, especially in the Black community, word of mouth, that really can do a whole lot when it comes to telling more people about clinical research. So I encourage everyone to speak up and, to talk about their health and not to keep it to themselves, whatever health journey that they're going through, because there's someone there that can benefit from, the information that you have.
I agree. I agree. So tell us, where can we find you and learn more about your org?
So you can go to my website, bwicr.com. I am on LinkedIn. We are on Facebook. My TikTok's not working, but I know some people's TikTok is working, but mine is still not working. I don't know if it's because mine is a business page, but I need to probably look into that. But we're on Instagram as well. You can email us. You can Google Black Women in Clinical Research. And so that is the best way to contact us.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Danielle. We really appreciate it. And you please have a lovely day.
Thank you so much, Taylor.
Goodbye.